Chapter 248 of Jujutsu Kaisen has been one of the most exciting and I want to say one of the best chapters we've received recently, with the confirmation of Higuruma's death, seemingly the confirmation of Kenjaku's death, Yuji gaining reverse curse technique, and now Yuta is about to fight Sukuna. We also saw Sukuna go through sort of like a philosophical deep dive in himself and his own ideals, trying to understand people more, it seemed, and I know that a lot of people were either one, confused, or two, a bit mad that Gege made it seem like Sukuna now was gaining some sort of empathy out of nowhere for some reason, but I'll go over that later in the video. And I will also go over everything else that happened in the chapter other than Yuta appearing at the end and what I think that this means for the rest of the manga. But for right now, in the majority of this video, I do want to focus on if Yuta will be able to beat Sukuna, or not just beat him, but be able to damage him enough to where it gives maybe Hikari enough time to come fight with Yuta, or maybe even Maki can come and join the fight, and together they might be able to take down Sukuna. So with that being said, let's get into whether or not Yuta can contend with Sukuna in a one-on-one fight. Or to be more accurate, it would be a 2-on-1 fight because Yuta and Rika would be fighting together. And speaking of Rika, there are some very important things we need to go over. One, we know that Rika has two forms, one where her eye is open and that is her awakened form, which she's much more powerful in, and two, Rika seems much bigger now. But for now, let's focus on the first thing. We know that whenever Rika has her eye open, it says in chapter 179 that she is switched into high gear. With the eye open is the form that we saw her let off the blast against Geto with. We also saw her go into this form when Yuta had the domain clash with Ryu and Uro. In the fanbook, it actually calls this form of Rika Awakened Rika, and we know that she uses more powerful blast in this form and presumably should be faster and hit harder. Rika usually goes into this mode whenever Yuta's life is in danger, so it makes sense that she's starting off in this mode now, but we 100% will see Rika go into her awakened mode in the fight with Sukuna. The next thing we have to talk about is how large Rika looks now, and this is either the result of Yuta training and getting closer with Rika, and the reason I want to say this is because in the fanbook it says during the volume 0 section that Gege's original plan was to have Rika and Yuta get stronger as Yuta and Rika got closer together. Now, I don't know if Gege is bringing that back here. Maybe Yuta and Rika went and trained somewhere, got closer, and now Rika is as big as she is, but she's so large now that her entire hand is just covering up Sukuna, and you can just see how big she is next to Yuta now, whereas before, even though she was much bigger than Yuta, it was nowhere near to this extent. We even saw one of the chapter covers that Gege drew. Among all of the current sorcerers, we see Rika, and she is just large in this chapter cover. She's taking up almost half of the page, and there's a clear size difference between Rika here and in the recent chapter than what she looked like in the fight with Ryu and Uro. And like I said earlier, this might be a callback to when Gege said that the original plan was to have Rika get stronger by Yuta and Rika getting closer. It would be sort of a tell that Yuta has been training a lot in the past month, and if he has been training a lot, that's very good because he needed to get much stronger in order to actually even fight near evenly with Sukuna. And whenever Yuta trains, it's different than when an average sorcerer trains or even any other high tier sorcerer, because Yuta is the only person with the capability of copying others' curse techniques. So he will not only be training physical stats like speed and punching power, for example, but Yuta also has to train his proficiency in using other curse techniques like sky manipulation that he copied off of Uro, curse speech that he got from Inumaki, Drew Shikigami technique that he copied from him, and possibly even more hidden techniques that we haven't seen him use yet that he copied in the past month. And speaking of curse techniques that Yuta could have copied, I think that one of the most likely ones that he has copied was the Angel's curse technique, and that is to extinguish any curse technique. And we also see that with this curse technique it is possible to use the Jacob's ladder, and that has messed up Sukuna in the past. It's supposed to purge evil from somebody, and as we saw before, it recognizes Sukuna is evil. So if Yuta is able to use it for himself, then I would actually give him a good shot against Sukuna, because this Jacob's ladder technique was able to completely maul Sukuna the first time. It seemed like it was ripping him to shreds, and Sukuna was screaming in agony the entire time until he tricked Hana in turning the curse technique off. And for other curse techniques that Yuta has, I don't think that that the cursed speech technique will be that good against Sukuna, since it seems like you can just defend against the technique. It also seems if you're strong enough, the technique won't be that effective against you, depending on what the attacker uses. I want to say that Yuta should be strong enough to use Don't Move on Sukuna and make it where Sukuna is, unable to move for a short amount of time, but I'm not quite sure if Sukuna is too strong for Don't Move to work on him. We know that Inumaki was able to use it against Hanami, and there is a clear power discrepancy between those two, so it probably is likely that Yuta can use Don't Move on Sukuna even if it keeps him still for just a moment. I don't think Sky Manipulation will be that good in actually damaging Sukuna, but I rather think it would be useful in gaining space against Sukuna, which I don't even know if space is something Yuta would want in a fight against Sukuna, since it seems like Sukuna would be better at range fighting. We saw Yuta say that he didn't think that the Sky Manipulation technique would be good for dealing damage, as he said that he wasn't receiving any damage when fighting Uro at the start of the fight, but we did see that whenever Yuta used it himself, he did crack Ryu in the stomach and made him bleed from the mouth. So maybe, just maybe, Yuta can use Sky Manipulation at a level high enough to actually deal some sort of damage to Sukuna, but I don't think the Sky Manipulation will be the technique that does it. We know Yuta also has Drew Shikigami, and those also don't seem like they would be effective against somebody like Sukuna. I think the most damaging technique, if he has it, would be Angel's Curse technique, because of the ability to purge evil and the ability to extinguish other curse techniques. And although we haven't seen Yuta's domain expansion, we knew that he used it in the fight with Ryu and Uro, but we don't actually know what it is or how strong it is, other than the fact that it was able to clash with both of theirs. I highly doubt Yuta would be able to clash domains with Sukuna, given all of the divineness that Gege has said about Sukuna's domain expansion, and the fact that Sukuna's domain was able to clash and even beat Gojo's in a domain expansion. If Sukuna were to use domain against Yuta, I don't think Yuta will be able to win a domain clash. Maybe he would, given how far Gege wants to take this Yuta training that he has been doing for the past month, but even with training in mind, it's just hard for me to believe that his domain would have reached the likes of Gojo and Sukuna's. It also is sort of interesting that Sukuna was able to block Yuta's sword using only 2 or 3 fingers whenever Yuta came and swung at the end of the chapter. I hope this isn't saying that Yuta will never be able to pierce Sukuna's body with his sword, because even though it would make sense, given that Sukuna is extremely durable, it would put Yuta in a bad spot if his main choice of weapon doesn't even work against Sukuna. We also know that Yuta has reverse curse technique, so even if he does receive cuts from Sukuna, he should be able to heal them. The only problem would come if Sukuna were to cut entire limbs off. We saw that Higuruma was able to regrow his arm, and Yuta, given that he already has Rika out, should be able to heal an entire arm if he loses one as well, since he has such a large curse energy pool. And this other thing is, we know that Yuta already pulled up with Rika out, but looking at his hand, he doesn't actually have the ring on yet, so the 5-minute connection where he can use other curse techniques and all of these tools that Rika has stored, that 5-minute connection has not begun yet, so he can still use it at any point within the fight, which is something we should address. The 5-minute connection isn't the time limit for how long Rika can be out, it's just the time limit for him to be able to use these curse techniques and the tools that Rika has stored. Once the 5 minutes are up, he can no longer use these curse techniques. He now has to rely on his own arsenal, which is normally the sword he fights with, and his own speed and strength. If Yuta does get dealt a very dangerous blow from Sukuna, say for example he gets his hand cut off or maybe his entire arm cut off, I think that would be the best time for Yuta to put on the ring on, whatever hand he has left, and then he connects with Rika so he can use RCT without losing his curse energy. And what I mean by this is, even though Yuta has a lot of curse energy on his own, we saw in the fight with Ryu and Uro that without Rika there, he did begin to bottom out when it came to his curse energy pool. So he will need Rika if he plans on using reverse curse technique in his fight with Sukuna. We also know that it says in the fanbook, Rika and Yuta share vision, so while they're fighting Sukuna, if they want to launch any combo attacks, or if Rika sees something and Yuta won't be able to see it, they can just share vision with each other and then they'll be able to fight efficiently. But that's enough for talking about Yuta. For now, I'll visit him again at the end, but for right now we need to talk about the other things that happened in chapter 248 and what they mean for the rest of the series. First thing, the way Higuruma's executioner sword bounced off of Sukuna's back was extremely shocking, as although we knew that it kills anybody it pierces, it did sort of seem like it would be able to pierce anybody. I know that's a bit of a leap, but everybody going into this chapter was like, Sukuna has to move out of the way or else he will die. That's because everybody thought that the sword, byproduct of what it does to somebody, should just be able to stab anyone. But nope, it just bounced right off of Sukuna's back. It makes sense, you know, that Sukuna has a durability so high that the sword wasn't able to pierce him, but given the fact that it did pierce his hand in the chapter before, we did think that it would be able to pierce his back if Yuji actually landed the blow. But even though Yuji landed it, it just bounced right off of him. After that, we see Yuji get slashed by Sukuna, and we also see that Uui and Kurata come and teleport Higuruma's body away to Shoko, and I actually do think it is a chance that Higuruma might still be alive. Although it would also make sense if he was to be dead here. But the slashes that Higuruma took weren't extremely fatal, if that makes sense. Like, it's not like his head got cut off or he lost all 4 limbs. He did get slashed pretty badly to his midsection, so he might still be alive if he makes it to Shoko fast enough. But like Sukuna says in the next panel, Shoko's reverse curse technique is not as good as Gojo's or his own, so maybe she won't be able to save him. We also saw right after this that Yuji was able to use reverse curse technique for the first time that we were able to see, and he heals his stomach. And this sort of sends Sukuna into some philosophical introspection on himself. He begins asking himself why he's getting upset. Maybe he thinks he's sad that Higuruma has died. And then he just starts reinforcing himself that he does what he wants, he kills who he wants, he eats what he wants, but even with all of this in mind, he's still a bit unsatisfied. We see Sukuna talking about how even over 1,000 years ago, he didn't think about other people who died doing what they wanted to do or died trying to fight him, because he sees now that Yuji has an ideal, and the ideal for Yuji is to kill Sukuna. And Sukuna even says that he thinks that some of those people 1,000 years ago were posing. They didn't actually believe fully in these ideals that they had, but Sukuna says that since he shared the same body with Yuji, he knows firsthand that no matter how many times he breaks Yuji, Yuji will continue to come back as long as he is alive. He even says that Yuji is able to match him when it comes to ideals. We then see after this that Sukuna eats an orb that comes out of nowhere, and a new rule was added to the Culling Games, being that Megami Fushiguro has the ability to start the merger between Tengen and society, which I think confirms Kenjaku is dead, and that is what he meant by my will be inherited. I do think that this ending for Kenjaku was a bit underwhelming given how big of an antagonist Kenjaku was, but I think that the fact that his head is off, Yuta returns from Kenjaku, means that Kenjaku is pretty much dead. And the fact that he made this rule, it just all seems like an ending for Kenjaku. I think that if Kenjaku was still alive, then Yuta wouldn't have come back. It seems like Yuta would have killed Kenjaku before coming back, which makes the most sense to me. And this sort of last act was adding this rule that Megami could start the Culling Games. And this is where we see Sukuna say that he's just going to kill everybody there. Then after he kills everybody, he's going to start the merger, then play with the merger to pass time. This is the type of person Sukuna is. He just does what he wants, kills who he wants, and doesn't think twice about it. But right after he says this is when Yuta comes into the fight, swings at Sukuna, and Sukuna tells him, "Don't forget, struggle and resist. If you don't kill me, the ones you want to protect will all die." And this is when we see Rika say, "Who are you saying it to?" And Sukuna says, "Here's the queen." So I think this entrance was beautiful for Yuta. What Sukuna is telling him to don't forget to struggle and resist, or else everybody Yuta loves will die, I think is the best way to get Yuta in the right mindset to fight him. We also know that all of these sorcerers in their fights with Sukuna have gotten stronger. Yuji was now able to use reverse curse technique. Higuruma, when pushed so far against Sukuna, was also able to use reverse curse technique, and also thought on his feet to use domain amplification to nullify Sukuna's slashes. So given that normally the occurrence is the sorcerers fight against Sukuna, get pushed near their deaths, and then just gain newfound strength, I think it's possible that Yuta will get his back to the wall near death. And if Yuta gains a similar power up, I don't know what it would be for him since he already knows how to use reverse curse technique. Maybe Yuta gets some newfound strength as well, like how Gojo had an awakening when he was younger. If Yuta gets in this situation against Sukuna, where his back is against the wall, he's almost about to die, I think Yuta will gain some newfound strength, something like an awakening that Gojo went through, maybe a power-up like Yuji and Higuruma went through, and if Yuta, as strong as he is, gains a power-up like that, on top of the fact that it looks like he's gotten stronger since Rika is much bigger now, I think that Yuta actually has a decent shot at weakening or possibly even taking down Sukuna. With that being said, I want to thank you so much for reaching the end of the video, and if you enjoyed, then I would really appreciate it if you could leave a like and subscribe to the channel, as I do post on different topics that you guys give me and a few that I come up with on my own. Thank you so much for watching. See you next time.